empowering you to build better lives. That's what we do. Okay, so listen, welcome to today's Empower podcast. I am filming, and we are filming from Salt Lake City, the Salt Palace, where we are actively engaged in the live event. We have about 5,000 people from Europe, Latin America, the US, those who made it through the flight dilemmas and challenges over the last week. With Kindra Hall, I'm so excited to dive into this. And Kindra, I'm going to tell the story of how we met, if that's okay, because it's the theme of the whole thing. Kindra just got off stage. It's been an amazing time with you. Yeah. I love your story. We're going to get into that. Yeah. But when we met the first time, and I have to say, I was so impressed with you as a person. We were down in Boca Raton at an event.
Yep.
And you came walking up. And by the way, I'll tell the story because I'm on a text chat chain. And this text chat, while you're up on stage presenting just now I have to find which one it was. I get a picture of somebody you look like.
Oh.
And said, "Is this her sister?" So do you get that quite a bit?
I get it
a lot.
All the time.
So
all the time.
You know who I'm talking about.
I do know who you're talking about. Reese Witherspoon.
Yes. And you look you're prettier, but
I'll take it.
But very and not only is it your look, but your persona, your personality is also quite similar.
I think, talk about extremely talented.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sharp businesswoman. Yep. And just, she's a force of positivity. And I think unapologetically, hey, let's what was it? One of her companies was called Hello Sunshine.
Yeah.
I'm there could be worse people to be compared
There could be worse, and I've been compared to worse, so it's all right.
We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, so we were in Florida.
That's right.
At an event, never having met,
right.
But you came walking through, and I think it's because you look like her that I sat there as you were walking up, and I thought, I know this person.
Right.
And the minute we walk up, you said, "Hey, Ryan, how are you doing?" And you had this whole conversation, and I'm like, I have totally forgotten who this person is. Then fast forward the next day, I find out you're giving the keynote to a federation event. And the only way, I suppose you just happened to study who was at the event. Is that standard practice for you?
I mean, it's good to know. And it was an important event, right? There's a lot of important people in that room. You.
Except me. But yeah, there were a couple of important people. So I was like,
where are the least important people? And I'm going to get to know who they are so they feel really important. No. And of course, I've known Nu Skin for a long time. Know your great work with the company. It was exciting to see you. I will say, though, it's intimidating to walk up to a group of, I don't know, I hadn't met. There were some people that I knew, but, to come in confidently and be like, but your reputation precedes you. So I knew you were.
It was impressive to me that you happened to know, and then you came on stage, you blew everyone away. Between those two moments, I went back and I figured out who you were, and I read your bio, and I pulled up your book and read the synopsis of it, and I was like, okay, stories. So fast forward a couple of hours before our main stage and my presentation, and I ran back into you and I said, "Kindra, I have an idea of the story that I'm going to tell."
Yeah.
And I proceeded to tell you the story.
Yeah.
And you got this look on your face. And it was somewhere between disdain and disgust.
I tried to hide it. I tried to hide it a little bit. Yeah.
And you said, "Ryan, maybe you shouldn't tell that story." I
don't think you should tell that story. And I don't remember exactly what the story was, but I remember you were. And
I'm not going to tell it here because clearly that's a problem, right?
So whatever it was.
It actually had something to do with. So I had just finished the book Will by Will Smith.
That's right.
And it had something to do with kind of the Chris Rock, Will Smith.
Yes, because that was in that moment.
Life,
yes, that's right. That's right.
And you said, "Yeah, we probably don't want to do that," and then you gave me a couple of ideas of how we could fix it. So instead of telling a story, I told the story about you and I meeting and you telling me not to tell the story. And that actually got a lot of attention, except every single person I met wanted to know the story.
To hear that story,
So I still haven't told the story and I won't tell the story. I'll lock it down.
Don't do
But it kind of leads us to the whole point of this idea, and I call it an idea because I'm an avid reader, but I've never quite heard this notion of becoming a storyteller.
Yeah.
And a professional storyteller. And so I want to dive into where this came from, how this came about. And to do that, I want to get into how you grew up.
Yeah.
Because I believe that, and I think we all believe that powerful ideas change the world, right? Mm-hmm. This idea that you've come up with, this becoming, knowing your story, telling your story, knowing how to tell your story, is a powerful idea that shapes people, I think, fundamentally. So tell me a little bit, how did you grow up, like single, only child? Grew up in Minneapolis. Like, give us a little bit of background.
So I grew up. I grew up in rural Minnesota. So we were on like 10 acres.
Like
my
a
neighbor.
Cheese farm?
No, well, that's Wisconsin.
It's not a cheese farm.
Oh my gosh, Wisconsin. Now,
Wisconsin.
let's not. Love for all the Wisconsin, but as a Minnesota,
for sure. Yeah,
so it's super rural. Okay. Oldest of 3 kids. My parents are both social workers, so very communicative. Welcoming home. And as I told on stage today, I was in 5th grade and got this assignment to read a book, which I turned into telling a story. And it was amazing standing in, I can still remember the exact classroom I was in. And just like I told on stage today, when I put the book down and just started telling the story, it was like, and it was meant to be, because this is what I meant to do, but there was like this weird magnetic thing where it was like the universe saying, pay attention to this moment and what's happening right here, because these 3rd graders were all over the place. But as soon as I started telling the story, we were all in a space together. And then I saw this happen several more times in my life. So we would have, my parents have a cabin that's 5 hours from the Twin Cities, and we would
which you're
drive.
heading off to directly.
Heading off to when we leave
that's
here.
Why the airplane.
Yeah, that's why the
airplane
clothing.
Okay, so
my kids are up there right now, so we're going up to the cabin to pick them up. But it's a 5-hour drive, and my dad would be listening to, the Twins or the Vikings, depending on the time of year. I'd be reading a book, because I can read in the car. Some people can't, but I can. My sister would be. I think it's because I have that like Norwegian Viking blood. Like I can read. Going backwards on a train or in a ferry or whatever. I know but anyway, that's beside the point. So, and then there'd always be the point where we were arguing over what we should do in that time. And I remember my mom had found this cassette tape that was a collection of stories from the National Storytelling Festival.
Okay.
So there's this National Storytelling Festival in Jonesboro, Tennessee. And she said, well, let's try listening to this cassette tape. She put the cassette tape in the player, and my dad was laughing and enjoying it. My mom was laughing and enjoying it. I was laughing and enjoying it. My brother, my sister, like 5 people, all with different things right there. And so that continued to happen. And then, I had all these little moments along my life, but I ended up at the National Storytelling Festival, telling there with all of these. So when we think about, so often I teach storytelling in business. And so you think, oh, there must be like a marketing background. But I grew up going to these then festivals and watching a storyteller be on the stage in front of an audience of hundreds of people from all different backgrounds, from all different areas of the country, of the world. And every time, as soon as there was a story, everyone was all there. And then think about that story you told just a few minutes ago. You didn't even tell the story. And people came up to you and wanted to know the story. Because this is what, this is what it is to be human. We want the story.
It's literally, I don't know if you've read Yuval Harari's
Sapiens.
So Sapiens, right? And he talks about that we are a civilization. He calls them myths, right?
Yes.
But myths, whether it's religion, whether it's, we learned by sitting around a campfire. And that was how information was communicated. But it's literally in our heritage.
It is who it's our
of how we learn, how we engage, how we remember through stories.
And that's where, and it really was like our evolutionary edge. It's how humans as a species were able to come together, and we could talk about and communicate about things that were immediately in front of us. We could talk about concepts and ideas. And so I think, there's so much technology. There's so many things that we're always, and so it's easy to forget that this was the thing that gave us our edge from the beginning of time. It'd be like a scorpion, not using its venom.
Yeah.
Or a zebra not like utilizing its stripes. Yeah, like that's for sure. That's a great point. That is our thing.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because I think it's probably because we can think in stories that we forget how important stories are. Like it almost ends up being like a catch-22. So,
but you said when you were in third grade?
Fifth grade,
you first noticed it, which I think that's an extremely acute observation at that age.
Yeah.
To acknowledge that, hey, I just captivated a group of kids. And by the way, my peers that you can't captivate.
Yeah.
Nobody can captivate third graders, fourth graders, fifth graders. But you realize there's something there.
Yeah.
Fast forward in life, like where did this become
a thing?
Your thing?
Yeah.
Like you go to university, how did this shape to that?
Well, so I continued telling story. I mean, I was on the speech team, so it tells stories on the speech team. And then it was really my senior year of college. And it's funny how in moments of desperation, we kind of find our thing. So like when I was in fifth grade, desperate to like be popular, stand out somehow. I'm like, wait, there's this story thing. And in college, it was my senior year of college, I had signed up for an independent study class. And then I realized like at the end of it, I actually had to study something. And I was like, what am I gonna? And so I decided I was like, you know what? I'd be really interested to see how stories work in an organization. And so I happened to have a connection at the local hospital system. And I asked their head of nursing if I could come in and interview their nurses. And I organized 2 groups. Each one had like 17 to 20 nurses. And I just sat there and listened to their stories. And then it was over the course of several days. I gathered all the information and then I coded the stories against like who was involved in the story. Was it positive, negative? And once I assimilated all this, I could go, this is where I get I could like tell you all the details of it.
Let's go.
But it was so interesting. Once I put it all together, some really important nuances of the culture of the organization began to emerge. Like the most positive stories were when it was between nurses and patients. That's when the stories, just as they told them, it was all positive. It was, some of them were difficult and sad, but there was the positive notion to them. And the most negative stories were the ones between doctors and nurses. And so then as we did this analysis, what does that mean about the culture? What can we work on? What needs to be explored further? And I think it was so funny because here I am coming to the end of my senior year of college. I got to figure out what to do next. I remember getting together with my grandfather and he was like, so you're almost done with college. Like, and he said, how are you going to make $1 million? Like that's all Grandpa wanted, was for me to make $1 million. And he's like, so what's your plan? And I said, I remember we were sitting in the basement of my aunt's house and I was like, well, I think I'm going to go into organizational consulting, where I've developed a matrix where if I can go into an organization and interview the various people that and code their stories based on blah, 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 I can make suggestions. I just made it up because my grandpa's like, how are you going to make $1 million? And everyone's kind of sitting around. And then I ended up going to graduate school because I didn't have a job.
Right.
And that was what I studied then in graduate school. And it just kind of kept going in that way. There.
And you've seen the power of this concept going through. So you just presented to 5,000 people that all are independent contractors doing their own thing. Who needs to learn the art of storytelling? And maybe this is a softball question, maybe not. I don't know.
I mean, you know what I'm going to say.
I know what you're going to say.
But it is everybody.
Yeah.
But think about it. Yeah. Absolutely everybody.
Yeah.
If you're a parent and you're trying to, regardless of what age your child is, and you're trying to help them navigate through the various. I remember once my son, when he was very little, he got his first splinter and he was out of his mind. Like he was 3 years old, sobbing like it was the worst thing ever. He couldn't, and we had to like try to pull it out. It was in there real good. And there was no way to calm him down. To get this splinter out of him. And my husband, now by proxy with all the storytelling that he's had to listen to, knew in that moment that what his son needed to calm down was a story. Yeah. And so my husband started telling my son about how he would, he grew up in San Diego. They spent a lot of time around boats, and the docks were always made of wood. And he would run on the docks and come back with all these splinters in his feet. And he would just sit there. And it was so fun to watch him pull out. Like you pull each one and it stings a little, but then you can see this piece of, and he was telling my son this story. And all of a sudden my son had context, 3 years old, for what this thing is that's happening to him. And it seems like such a small moment, but these are, and now he's 13, trying to understand much bigger problems and more complicated things than a splinter in his foot. You think about if you are working in a corporate setting and you're trying to raise a team, if you're entrepreneurial, if you have any involvement in fundraising or community organizing, if you have a political hopes and dreams, anytime you have a message that you're passionate about and you really want people to understand, you have to tell the story of the moment you discovered that passion. I know you shared a story about your all in moment. Like you can just keep saying all in, all in, all in, all in all the time. Right. But until you tell the story of what that looks like, it's just kind of out there.
Yeah, it's like this cerebral process until you tell the story.
Exactly.
And then the story becomes more, it's the heart and the mind.
Exactly.
I guess you can say.
And it brings it in and it makes it memorable and we engage in that co-creative process, whereas as we're hearing the story, we're adding the images and our experiences to it. And now it like means something.
I mean, so speaking of that, and I knew we were going to have this conversation, so I was looking back at the Florida event and some of the notes I had and on your speech back then, and as I was getting ready for this management meeting, so we had all of our global vice presidents in. We were taking them back to the warehouse because sometimes you sit in the high rise and there's all these comfortable chairs and you forget that at the end of the day, business is all about getting a product that people love to the consumer and doing it at the base level. And as we were going through this, I started to talk about startup culture and the difference between startup culture, and I could see everyone's faces just looking at me, but not hearing what I was saying, what I was trying to convey. And the thought came to my mind, and probably because of this, I wish I was more automatic, was this story that I had heard in 2016. I'm sitting in Hong Kong at one of our conventions, 22,000 people in this hall, and this lady gets up, right? And she gets up on stage, and she had a unique way about her. We were recognizing her for accomplishing one of our top achievements.
Right.
But she looked like this humble lady, right? And so I was immediately like struck by that.
Yeah.
And she started to tell her story. And her story was, for the last 16 years of my life, I have woken up with my husband every single morning at 4 a.m. to go to our ramen shop, to prepare the ingredients, to feed people breakfast, lunch, and dinner 365 days a year for 16 years. And then she said, my son has grown up in that. He's now 16 years old. He's preparing for university. And she wanted to thank Nu Skin because she said, we were able to sell our ramen shop. And they went on their first family vacation. They went on their first. And so she was talking about the startup and the ownership of when something broke, you didn't call the help desk. You didn't call the ops person to go fix it. You do everything. And it was crazy to see the management team with that story. I didn't have to explain anything more cerebrally.
Exactly.
It's like we all understood, oh, that's the person. When we talk about being all in, when we talk about being startup, when we talk about being owners, that story connected the whole point.
Exactly.
And it probably saved an hour of explaining the tactical, what does X, Y, Z mean on the intellectual level.
Right. Well, and the intellect, it's important. Yeah. It's important to have it. Yeah. But if you want what you're saying to be remembered, like it has to go in. Yeah. And the story is the way that it goes in. And and at the very least builds a foundation of understanding from which you then can build, right? And you can refer back to it if you need to, once you get into all that tactical. But see, and isn't it wild? So you were in the meeting and you were like, you could see them all and that's when you knew to tell a story.
Yeah. Well, again, I think it was because I had looked at the notes on Sunday and then I was like, you're like, this isn't working.
You're like, let's
try it.
Right? I need a story.
We'll try it.
Yep.
And I think these moments happen all the time. But I think the power of stories and storytelling. So let's get a little more tactical on that side. What makes a good story? What are the components of a good story?
So let's talk first about what I think people think makes a good story is that it needs to be really, and I see this a lot, especially in groups like this, like it has to be big, it has to be dramatic, it has to make people cry or whatever. And really the power of story is almost in its familiarity. It's in finding those moments where people can, even if it's an experience completely different from their own, but where people can see themselves in it and make those like threads of connection. Exactly.
Of a moment or circumstance or situation.
And the emotion behind it. Yeah. So in our research, because that was a question I wanted to, after watching stories for essentially my entire life and being able to see which ones and who really were the master storytellers, where years later, you're still carrying wisps of the threads of the stories that you told, that they told you. It really boiled down to 4 key components. So if you want to get really tactical, we can talk about what those are. So the first one, and in no particular order, is identifiable characters. So, and that's one of the benefits that you have here is because every single person in the room at this event, every entrepreneur, every one of their customers, the woman that you saw on the stage in Hong Kong, they're characters, right? The character can be you, it can be someone on your team, but who they are, what they're hopeful for, like that, the essence of that person. The second component is authentic emotion. And it's important to clarify it as authentic emotion, because this kind of goes back to what I was saying is it can be guilt as an authentic emotion. It can be hope for the future. It can be being tired. It can be like desire. It doesn't have to be I climbed Mount Everest and I'm the most, like it can be these small emotions that we feel every single day. The emotion of like envy or, that just a little bit of, I'm proud of myself, right? And that goes back to that familiarity because we all feel those things.
For sure.
Authentic emotion and then a moment. And this is essential because where stories can often go wrong is we can talk about them in broad strokes instead of talking about them in the moment where they happened. So you were talking about the woman that you saw on stage. And so as you were describing that story to me sitting here, I was sitting in the room of that event with those 22,000 people, seeing this woman on the stage and hearing her story told through you, right? But that's where I was sitting as you told. And I bet if you ask anyone else who is listening to you tell that story via this podcast, they'll have the same. They were somehow
a visualization moment.
Exactly.
Almost. I love that. By the way, I'm taking a couple of notes as you go. You said a couple of things, and I'm like, I don't know, David, are you going to take notes on this?
I think it's all being recorded. I think that's the whole point.
Keep going, but I need to take this because it's good. So keep going.
Really, essentially, what you want is you want the person, and so this idea of the moment, and this is where you keep it from being like this. I followed my dreams and I pursued my passion and I overcame my fears. It could be, one story that came to me was a woman who had been in this industry for a long time. It goes all the way back to when you would get like printed checks. It wasn't like direct deposit or credit card, right? And she told me the story of like the first, she had started her business and her husband was all like, I don't know what this is. And he was very skeptical and she was a little nervous too. And then she was at home and checked the mail and there was an envelope and it was from the company. And she opened it, not really understanding, and pulled out this check and she was standing in her foyer, like the stairs were going up. She was just standing in her foyer, and she just started screaming, like holding this like piece of paper in her hands, just screaming. And her husband came in from the kitchen and said, what's wrong? And she said, look, they sent me money. And so even as I tell you that, and I'm like, aren't you standing in the foyer with her?
For sure.
Looking at that check, right?
It's a brown staircase. It's
there you go. Wall. And like my foyer looks different than the foyer.
Husband has a mustache, by the
way.
There you go.
See?
Paper checks.
But that's exactly, but you're probably like, as I tell, I'm like I'm kind of standing next to her, like over her shoulder a little bit, but that's what you want. Yeah. When you tell the story, you want them to be right there in the room.
So context really matters. And you almost shouldn't skip over too much of the detail.
And you don't have to go so far that it was a dark, stormy day and the air
brown
was
staircase
humid. But after the fact, because I only need you, when you're telling the story, I only need you to be in the general vicinity of where I need you where to be. Yeah. Because then you'll be able to start that co-creative process.
That's a great concept.
I just kind of need you to be in that moment with me.
If you think about from the sales point of view, bringing people to where you need them to be is like the key, of sales. And so your point around storytelling is you almost draw someone in through that
you get
experience.
Them right there with you.
Yeah, that's
and then you
that's
can
like I've never thought of
that's
that.
Exactly what exactly what it is. But you have to start with, and by putting those details and then the fourth is strategic details. So like there's a reason that I said she was in the foyer of her home because I knew that that's going to help me.
I feel like I'm getting manipulated right now.
Well,
it's like what's next, right?
But this is now
hypnotism.
But it's true that so I love, because again, this is what humans are meant to do. Yeah. And we skip over so much of it because we're in such a rush, and we think that,
for sure.
And you hear that, they don't have the attention span. But you mentioned this earlier where you were talking about startup culture and and were they giving you their attention? No. But as soon as you started telling the story, and there's actually research that shows that as we hear stories, our brain releases cortisol, which it does a variety of other things. But one of the things that cortisol does is increases focus and attention. So biologically, when we hear a story, our brain releases cortisol, so we start paying attention. So we listen differently when someone's telling us a story. And so when you think about that, and then you slow down, and all I had to do was say foyer.
Yeah.
And you were right there. And then yes, if you can put them in the same place, but you're not like forcing it on them. No. They're joining you. Yeah. You're welcoming to sit, and you're almost like, hey, come on this ride with me. And that was the fourth component, is just a few details.
Yeah.
And so if I'm to tell the story, you have to be aware of your audience, and you're not always going to nail it. But if I were to tell that story now, it would be important that I clarify that you used to get in paper checks, because
100%.
Right?
Which is what brought the mustache, by the way.
Exactly. Because you're like,
all those mustaches are coming back.
I know they are. They really are. Right? Yeah. It's the new Top Gun.
So a couple years
ago. That could be a whole different journey.
That's another podcast.
That's a podcast for a different time. But so to know that there are, but don't let that stop you from telling a story. But so those are the components.
So that's so helpful. So it is in our biology, chemistry, it's in our society because of, again, cave people sitting around fires. It's the way we've always learned. Why do we need to relearn that? Like when you look at it and you say, okay, I'm going to write a book about it.
Yeah.
And you've since made your $1 million, so you can tell your grandpa you didn't lie to him.
No.
But since doing that, why do you think we're having to relearn the art of storytelling if it's so foundational to our human species in a way?
Again, I think it goes back to the fact that we can think so much that we just think it can't be that easy.
Yeah.
Right? Like you don't see the thing that's right.
It might even be formal education in some ways.
I do. Right? I think that
when we think about because when I stand in front of an audience, admittedly, I want them to know how much I know. Right? I mean, I want them to know, hey, this guy's not an idiot. Like he has and so therefore I go into data, I go into facts, I go into the book that I read, the author that
you've
validates
done all that work.
All those things, which again starts putting people to sleep, as we go, right? Because they're not connecting to it.
Right.
And so maybe it's this part of the process of storytelling is almost unpacking that and saying, listen, the audience they don't need, and we always hear that, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, whatever. But it's almost like in they're not going to listen until you capture them. But I wonder if that has something to do with it.
Well, I think, So if you think about all the education that we've had over, decades, we're being taught the things that we need to learn because they're not innate, right? And so then, but over time, the things that are innate which is our storytelling ability, have become buried deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And so we forget. So now I get up and write a book about storytelling, and it seems like the new
She's
thing.
A genius.
And I'm like, this is the oldest new thing there is.
Yeah.
But
it is powerful. It is powerful. I remember I was sitting with this. So I had first become, I was president of the business. No, I guess I had become CEO because I had to start doing the earnings releases.
Okay, yeah.
And so we brought in this, so we had our own corp comms person, Ruth Todd, who's amazing, and she now heads Bonneville Communications anyways. And she was like, she would always tell me, Ryan, she'd come in and practice rehearsing the script, because I hate scripts, first of all, but on an investor call, you say something wrong. So our attorneys review it, our CFO reviews it, and then you have to read this script line for line, and you get really nervous. And she's like, Ryan, stop, just tell me the story. Tell me the story. And so Ruth would say this, and it wasn't getting through. So she paid this lady, I think her name's Terry Gowdy. She was in the Chicago network, news network, to come in and coach me on doing these things. And Terry comes in kind of a pretty rough, like city approach. And she's like, Ryan, stop telling me facts and start telling me stories, right? And she was so adamant that the more we try to tell facts, the less we're actually captivating the audience with fact. And it was kind of interesting, just like, so she took me through the whole news anchor process. And she's like, if you watch good news anchors, they're telling micro stories after micro stories. They're not telling facts.
No.
Nobody cares at the exact time that X or Y or Z happened.
Yeah.
JFK was shot, right? Unfortunately, we know those moments, September 11th, those moments, but it's the context that people want. Yeah. And that's what we remember.
Well, and I think it's one of the big challenges for whether it is like the earnings call or whatever presentation you're having to give, or whether it's a one-on-one, like, hey, is figuring out what is the message I want to deliver? What do I want them to think, feel, know, or do? What's the message? Who's my audience? Where are they coming from? And then finding a story that matches those two. So I was working with a CEO of actually a hospital system. This is many years later. A new CEO. It was their big fundraising event. Everybody was a little bit like, who is this guy? What's going on? And I was brought in because he had to give this address, and he was like facts, statistics, and that just wasn't gonna do the job. And so when I was meeting with him, it was so interesting because I said, okay, so we're trying to find the story, and he didn't really know. He was very skeptical, like, why do I need to tell a story? So it took some time to figure it out, but we realized, here's this group of stakeholders, who's curious, a little skeptical about this new CEO, who he is. Does he understand who we are, what we're about? And I said, can you remember in, the short time you've been here, one of the moments that stood out to you when you really realized the essence of what this organization is? And he was like, well, we're all about this and we're all about that. And I said, yes, I know. But when is a moment that you realize that this is what you're all about? And so he told, it took a little bit of time, but it was at like this one town hall meeting. He saw this whole thing play out and was like, there's our story. So we scripted the story and he told it, and it was, and then he gave the information that he had to give, the State of the Union, the whatever. But because he started with this story, and you could tell in the way that he told it, that anyone sitting in the room was like, he gets us. He knows this. It answered all of their questions that they didn't even necessarily know that they had. And then he gave all the information. And after, like, you could hear, they invited me to come to this event. And I was sitting there like, oh gosh, please let this work. You could have heard a pin drop. It was, and then it was actually a fundraising event. They raised double what they had raised the year before, because we also integrated some stories in there too. But it was a way, so that's a recommendation that I would have, and I'm sure that's what some of the coaching was. Like, all right, these are the numbers you have to present. And here are the facts that are carefully measured and, dictated, because, lawyers have to look at it. But then what's the story that you could tell first that puts all of that and wraps it in the emotion of what this is all? Because business is not without emotion.
Yeah. No, in fact, it's nearly all emotion.
It's all emotion.
It's literally trying to get
That's what I feel like they've been trying to take the emotion out of business. And that's where we feel like it feels so wrong in so many ways. But it's all emotion. Like there's no...
No, a friend of mine has this big discussion around marketing, because I'm a marketing major, right? And she always says marketing is like, it's like inauthentic, like dishonest and whatever. And I'm like, I don't think that's the storytelling we're talking about. My grandma called them white lies. I don't even think that's what we're talking about.
No.
We're literally looking at how do you take real happenings, happenings, and relating that. But your point, what it was or is, determine what you need to get accomplished. Back from there, the story that helps us connect from here to there.
That illustrates it. Yeah. It's so interesting too, because I do think, we're talking about the education aspect of it. So people will say, okay, so I need to tell more stories. Marketing's a big thing, because you have marketing majors, right? And you're not taught storytelling.
No,
you're taught
quantitative analytics,
and like your
target market,
but exactly. But none of that matters if you. So I tell organizations, 100%. I'm like, you know what? Hire a creative writing major. Hire a journalism major, because they know. They understand the story.
That's right.
And then you can put it together with use your marketing majors to get the story out there and then measure its effectiveness. But go get yourself
that's fantastic.
The person whose dad was like, don't go into creative writing. That's never gonna, and then they should be the top marketing person.
That's brilliant. Okay, so I know you have to get to a flight. We have another session, so I want to ask this question to you. So, for the last how many years you have been driving this story idea into the public? One of the questions I like to ask people is like, what is your empowerment mission? When you die in 100 years, more from now, right? That's how long we'll all.
I'm like, wait, I don't want to go another 100.
But what is it that you want to accomplish? What's your next thing? What's the next evolution of this idea? And what propels you from an empowerment perspective?
I really think that, and it may sound, it goes all the way back to the whole Reese Witherspoon and her just being a positive force. I think that the other thing that is innately human is finding meaning in our lives. And I believe that recognizing the things that we've learned, the moments that we have, even the smallest interactions with someone else as stories, and how those add up to a bigger life. Like that you can find, like if we were all looking on a micro level at the stories that are happening to us at any given time or day, how much more meaning we would all have.
I love that.
And so I think that, I don't need a TV show. I don't want it. If I can just do this, like audience by audience, person by person, reading the book and saying, wait, this is, my life has meaning because I've lived these stories and I can share these stories, whether in a professional sense, like sales, marketing, whatever, or whether just within your own family, within your own community. That moment where people are like, wait, there's so much power in being generous with my stories.
And using, and I think something you do really well is I've followed you over the last few years on Instagram, on social media. You do a really good job, and I don't know how intentional it is. I assume it's semi-intentional, but
I'm not very intentional on social.
of building or bringing people into your story I remember you going into marathons or running, and that story that you went through, and you and your husband, and like his support for that. And it was cool for me because like on a digital marketing basis, it's all about identifying the persona that you're going after, right? And then you build your brand around who am I really and being intentional about the types of people that I target and all that. But I found the way you do social media, and so I guess I'm going to ask the question of how intentional is this? I think you do a great job of, and this is a big part of our business, right? People building out their not that you use the term character earlier, but building out their persona, their character, and being a little more thoughtful about what we put out onto social media ultimately for greater good. Because there's a lot of toxic stuff on social media. But I love your approach around doing that. And I'm wondering how intentional or how deliberate or how thoughtful is that process for you on social media?
I have tried it. I've tried so many different versions of, hiring someone to come and help with my social media strategy I've just, You've
just taken it on.
Because ultimately, I'm a storyteller. We're all storytellers, but stories are my business. And so I figure the best thing I can do is share my stories, invite people to become a part of my story, because I think that is
that's it. And I really believe, you remember the old, the storyboard.
Yeah.
When I look at Instagram today, because that's kind of my same thing. Blanca's always trying to do my social media for me, but and she gets so frustrated because I post. My kids say, Dad, if you post one more time of you skinning on doing this or riding a bike here, none of us want to see it. And I'm like, I don't really care. What I'm trying to build is my story so that when I die, if the only thing that was left was that storyboard, which Instagram has, that's my life. That's my story. And so what I've started to do more recently, and I need to balance it better with work and this and that, but if I could be if I could be more intentional in saying, no, that is my storyboard, and really be thoughtful about what are the moments that for the people that matter to me, right? For my kids, for whoever's going to look at that, because after I die, the only kids it'll be my 3 kids, right? That'll be it. But and maybe their grandkids, but if it's just maybe my cat, we'll watch it.
If cats at that point can tune into social media.
For sure. I think that's what's going to happen. But I think that idea of utilizing social media as your storyboard and helping to craft who you are as a persona, especially in our business, it's a powerful tool that if people are thoughtful about, it's a big unlock in my opinion.
And then people look forward to seeing. So we were recently at a farmer's market in Montauk, New York, which is where we go. And I was there with my husband, my 2 kids. We went up to the granola booth. The woman who makes her granola, and she was like, "Oh, hi!" And she said to my daughter, "Oh, I love watching you in the Nutcracker, and you were so great to my son in your play." And imagine if there were more strangers, but we feel like we know each other. It's just, I don't know. I feel like we're all looking for more connection. How do you feel connected to somebody? It's through the stories that they share. Where do we share stories? We share them on social media. So I should probably be more strategic about hire me as a keynote speaker, buy my book, but I don't know.
No, I don't think people want sales pitches though. I think people want authentic.
And in being authentic,
for sure.
you're again, it's sales the way it's meant to be, right?
Yeah. The non-con marketing.
Yeah.
So, well, Kindra, thanks so much for being here, and thanks for spending the time with us. I loved your presentation. The feedback's phenomenal. So we'll promote your book again. Go out and buy it. But thanks for being here, and we look forward. We're going to be in Korea.
We're going to be in Korea together
a month from now, and doing it again. Yeah, it's September 6th and 7th.
I know. I was talking backstage. I'm like, oh, we'll see you in a couple months. They're like, it's a month.
Pack your neck pillow, and we'll see you over there. Okay.
Can't wait.
Thanks for being here, and safe travels to Minnesota.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.